Hi guys, this is Crystal White, the early literacy coach from Lapeer ISD. I'm here to kind of present my PD. It was the first session of 2 of intentional interventions. I wanted to send this out because quite a few people couldn't make it to our first session, and so I wanted to try something new and kind of do a little Zoom webinar. So if anybody wasn't able to attend last week, then you would be able to view this webinar. And it's my first time doing one. I'm actually recording it on Zoom right now, so you have to bear with me. And it's day 7 of social distancing, and so I'm challenging myself to kind of explore technology, and so this is all new for me, so bear with me. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to kind of show you the slides, and then I'll even show you websites and resources, and I will do the best that I can. All right. So now I'm going to share my screen so you can see the PowerPoint that we used. All right, so we're just going to talk about the first session, which is what we did last week, and I'll skip all this stuff because I just introduced myself, but this was our focus questions from last week, and it's going to kind of extend to both sessions. So I'm not quite sure if we're going to be able to make up session 2 or not, or if this goes well, maybe I'll do another kind of like webinar type thing, but I'm hoping we'll get back to school in a few weeks, and then maybe sometime at the end of April or early May, we can kind of get to our second session of intentional interventions. But so here it goes. Our focus questions for the 2 sessions are, why is there an urgency to focus on early literacy? How can we use the MTSS pyramid with our instruction? And then also, what are some research supported instructional resources that I can use for intervention with my students? So I kind of started my presentation off with data. I like to do that. I'm a data person. There's a sense of urgency right now to kind of focus on early literacy because Michigan is ranked 41st out of the 50 states, and because we haven't been making huge gains, each year we are projected to be 48th out of the 50 states in the year 2030. Michigan is ranked dead last for teaching African American students to read. This is all based on the NAEP. It's a national assessment that 4th graders take. And then remember I was talking about we are projected to be ranked 48th by 2030. It's because we've been making negative improvement. So we're second to last for making growth. We're 1 in 5 states showing negative improvement each year. This data right here is just a tad bit outdated. I'll show you newer data about the MSTEP in a little bit. So here's the MSTEP data. This is statewide based on 3rd grade MSTEP data in last spring, 2018. Michigan was 45.1% proficient on the ELA assessment. And then the year before, we were 44.4% proficient. So we did make tiny gains. We didn't regress. But obviously that's just really, really tiny improvement. The year before in 2017, we were 44.1% proficient. And then as you can see, in 2016, we were 46% proficient. So we were higher in 2016 than what we were last year. So now as we get kind of a narrower perspective in Lapeer County, 54.2% of our 3rd graders were proficient last spring on the ELA MSTEP. And so one positive thing about that is we're higher than the state average, so that's great. But then on the other end, we have 354 3rd graders that are not proficient in reading in Lapeer County. Okay, so this is a new assessment that was just implemented this fall. This is the KRA assessment. They call it the Kindergarten Readiness Assessment. It's the mandated kindergarten entry assessment that the state of Michigan mandated this fall for our region. And okay, so this shows you a lot of different data from a lot of districts, but if we just look at Lapeer County, LISD wide, right here, it shows that we were 33% proficient. I'm sorry, not proficient. It's 33% of our students were considered kindergarten ready based on this assessment. Now, if you don't know anything about this assessment, it tests them in 4 different domains. It's on language and literacy, social foundations, that's kind of like social emotional. There's a physical aspect, and then there's also math. So based on that, it shows that 33% of incoming kindergartners this year at the beginning of kindergarten year, only 33% of them were actually ready for kindergarten. And then statewide, you can see right here, 34% of kindergartners were ready for kindergarten. So let's talk about clarifying MTSS and RTI for a minute. So on the MDE website, they defined MTSS, which stands for multi-tiered system of supports, as an integrated multi-tiered system of instruction, assessment, and intervention. It's designed to meet the needs and the achievement and behavioral health needs of all students. So it's kind of twofold. It's for achievement, like academics, and then also behavioral. So the MTSS stands for the multi-tiered system of supports. So you're probably used to the acronym RTI, response to intervention, and you're probably used to seeing the 3 different pyramids, the tier 1, the tier 2, and the tier 3. Well, MTSS really is a breakdown of RTI. If you look on the left, that's kind of like the academic pyramid of MTSS. And then on the other side would be more of your positive behavior interventions and support. Some people call that PBIS. So MTSS just kind of encompasses like the whole child, where it's academics and it's behavior. So now let's kind of clarify the tiers. This might just be a review for most of you. So this is a different way. It's kind of a linear way to look at the 3-tier pyramids for instruction. But tier 1 is your it's your core instruction that all students receive. It's based on your grade level standards. It's based on, you know, research supported practices, best practices such as differentiated instruction. It's based on whatever curriculum resources that your district has adopted or provided you or expects you to use. So one thing I do want to clarify, sometimes this is a misconception, but tier 1 instruction also includes small group instruction and conferring. So that means all students in your class, doesn't matter if they're high, medium, and low, they should be getting differentiated instruction. That should mean they should be getting, you know, that one-on-one conferencing. They should be getting that small group instruction that's kind of targeted to meet their needs too. So that's all encompassing the tier 1. That should, tier 1, all students receive that instruction, and that should really be really intentional, and it should meet the needs of many of your students. So I shared this document with you. Nell Duke has a differentiated literacy instruction document out there that kind of talks about the different tiers. What I am going to have you do is I'll give you a couple minutes to pull up this document. You might be able to even read it on my screen, but I want you to kind of read over what Nell says that high quality tier 1 instruction encompasses. So you're going to read the front page of this, and then you'll don't worry about looking at tier 2 and tier 3 yet. And then you're going to look on the second page when it talks about other effective ways that tier 1 instruction should meet the needs of students. So you'll look at that too. So if you want to, after I talk a few minutes about the bottom, the little dots, if you want to pause this video and take a few minutes to kind of look over that, that's totally fine. One thing I want to point out is it talks about 100% of children receive tier 1 instruction. So like I said, high, medium, low, special ed, everybody is getting that quality tier 1 instruction. And based on this and based on research, we know that about 80% of our students should only receive tier 1 instruction So about 80% of our students should only need tier 1 instruction. And so if you look all the way to the left, it shows about 80 dots are just green. That means 80 dots are just receiving tier 1 instruction. And if you move farther, to the right, you'll see some dots. You'll see about 15 dots that are kind of layered. So you'll see 15 dots that have green and have yellow. So that means about 15% of our students should need tier 1 and tier 2 supports. Okay, so tier 2 supports is kind of more targeted intervention. And then in addition to that, it talks about how only 5% of our students should need those really intensive interventions. So that's why you see it layered green, yellow, and red. Red's the tier 3. And if a student needs an intervention, whether it's tier 2 or tier 3, that means they're getting those things in addition to tier 1 instruction. So I'm going to give you a few minutes just to kind of look over, if you want to, this front page of the document, and then the next page, just where it's talking about tier 1 instruction. And don't worry about moving to tier 2 or tier 3 yet. So you're probably wondering why there's a picture of a washing machine right here, but when I saw Dr. Nell speak about intervention and just good quality instruction in general, this was a slide that she presented to us, and it kind of spoke to me. She talks about she compares instruction to a dishwasher. So if you had a dishwasher at home and you loaded your dishes in there, and time after time you had over half of your dishes come out dirty. Well, each time, are you going to um, just put half of your dishes away and rewash those other half? Or are you going to constantly, try to rewash all of the dishes all at the same time to get those clean? Well, you would probably think that it's not a problem with the dishes if over half of them are still dirty. It's probably a problem with your dishwasher. So this is an analogy with instruction. So time after time, if you are assessing students and 50% of them or more are not falling in benchmark terms or at grade level or above grade level, this is actually a tier 1 problem. So you're not going to try to give 50, 60, 70% of your students interventions, tier 2 and tier 3 interventions. We have a problem with the whole system, and our whole system is our tier 1 system, our good quality instruction. We really need to focus on our tier 1 instruction if we have a problem where close to 80% of our students are not thriving with tier 1 instruction. So this is another quote that it kind of resonated with me as well. When I was getting my ed specialist degree, one of my colleagues in my class, when we were presenting on MTSS, he had mentioned this quote: "You can't intervene your way out of a tier 1 problem." So if your pyramid after you assess students looks like this, and you have way more kids in the red and in the yellow than you do in the green, there's no amount of interventions that's going to fix that problem. What is going to fix it is good quality research supported instruction. Remember, we really want to shoot for 80% of our students thriving in tier 1, only 15% of our students needing tier 2, and then around 5% needing that intensive tier 3 interventions. And that's where the K3 and the 4-5 in essential instructional practices in early literacy came out. Those are all tier 1 instructional practices that should be happening. They give us the biggest bang for our buck, and that's what we need to be using with our instruction in order to kind of reverse this pyramid right here and get closer to these numbers down here. So we're not really talking about tier 1 instruction today. I spent a lot of time talking about that, and that's the most important type of instruction, but we're here to talk about what's effective for intervention. So we want to know, what does research say about intervention in systems? So like I said, tier 2, those are targeted interventions. Only some students should need that. That means they're getting their tier 1, and then in addition to that, they're getting a tier 2 intervention. And then tier 3, few students should need that, okay, around the 5% mark. Those are the intensive interventions. That means they're getting the core tier 1 instruction, they're getting the targeted intervention for tier 2, and then in addition to that, they're getting some sort of intensive intervention. So right now, there's this really cool resource. I don't know if you've been on the What Works Clearinghouse website or not, but there's practice guides on there. There's many of them, but this one that we're going to talk about today is called Assisting Students Struggling with Reading, Response to Intervention, and Multi-Tier Intervention in the Primary Grades. So in this book, it's packed with what research recommends to support an MTSS kind of intervention model or system. I'll show you how you can get there in a minute. I'm going to give you an overview of the recommendations, and then later on, actually, I'll just put the link in the either PowerPoint that I send, or I'm going to put it in the agenda that I send. But recommendation number 1 is to screen all students for potential reading problems at the beginning of the year and again in the middle of the year, and then regularly monitor the progress of students who are at elevated risk for developing reading disabilities. So we know that, you know, most of our districts they have a screener, whether it's NWEA or whatnot, but we are mostly doing that. So so that's great. Most districts are doing it, you know, 3 times a year according to the 3rd grade reading law. So it's kind of like fall, winter, spring, but we know that research supports at least doing it beginning of the year and middle of the year. When you actually pull up this document, it's going to give you a little like article, and it's going to go more in depth with this recommendation, but I'm just giving you an overview. And then later on, I would like you either to pause the video after I give this overview of each recommendation and kind of spend some time looking at it more in depth, or at another time you can kind of do that. It'll give you more information as you read from the booklet. So recommendation number 2 is provide differentiated reading instruction for all students based on assessments of students' current reading levels. So when you look in the book, it's going to give you more information about that, but really it's just talking about high quality research supported tier 1 practices. So, and you know, you can always pull out our literacy essentials K3 guide or 4 or 5 guide, and that can help you with your quality tier 1 instruction. Recommendation number 3 is provide intensive systematic instruction on up to 3 foundational reading skills in small groups to students who score below the benchmark score on universal screening. Typically, these groups meet between 3 to 5 times a week for 20 to 40 minutes. So I really love this recommendation because it gives explicit things in here. It tells you that when you are giving a tier 2 intervention to a student, you never want to focus on more than 3 foundational skills. Okay, so it's going to be 1, 2, or 3 things. So 1, 2, or 3 specific foundational objectives when you are doing interventions with students. So I really like that. There wasn't any hard and fast score or hard and fast number for us to kind of things for us to kind of focus on, but now we know that research says no more than 3. What I also like about this is it talks about how you know, research supports that groups need to meet between 3 and 5 times a week. We got that, and then it talks about the time limit, typically 20 to 40 minutes. Recommendation 4 is monitor the progress of tier 2 students at least once a month. That's another hard and fast kind of like number. So we know we need to do progress monitoring at least once a month for students. So your progress monitoring obviously is going to kind of match your intervention too. It says use these data to determine whether students still require intervention. For those students still making insufficient progress, school-wide teams should design a tier 3 intervention plan. That tells you how you can kind of move up the interventions. If they were getting tier 2 and you've been progress monitoring and then it hasn't been working, and that's when you kind of meet back with your school-wide team and design your tier 3 intervention plan. Number 5 says provide intensive instruction on a daily basis that promotes the development of the various components of a reading proficiency to students who show minimal progress after a reasonable time in Tier 2 small group instruction. So that means it goes along with the recommendation right before this one. It's just telling you, like, make sure that, you know, if students, you're monitoring the Tier 2 intervention, if they're not making gains, then you need to bump them up to a Tier 3 intervention. Remember, that's going to be intensive. And then this also tells you that you need to be giving Tier 3 interventions daily. So this is an overview. If you're looking at the practice guide, what I like the best is to look on page 9. It gives you a little overview of some additional information for each recommendation. And then if you move forward on after page 9, it's going to get down into each recommendation and give you a lot more information on how to carry out the recommendation. So if you want to pause this webinar right now and kind of look at each recommendation in depth, you're more than welcome to do that. Or if you would just like to look at that later, that's totally fine. Actually, I do want to show you how to get to the What Works Clearinghouse. So I'm going to continue to play with my technology. Remember, this is a first for me. So I'm going to drop down. I'm going to open up my Chrome internet. And then what I like to do is just type in What Works Clearinghouse. So this is like the first thing that pops up. I'm going to show you a couple different things while we're here, okay? So if you just click on, this is the main page for What Works Clearinghouse. If you go all the way down and you click on practice guides, it's going to show you all the different practice guides that are out there. There's so many of them. Some of these are so awesome. I haven't had a chance to look at all of them, but I am recommending this one, Foundational Skills to Support Reading for Understanding in Kindergarten through 3rd grade. That one is a really awesome one. If you want to know about how to teach literacy to English language learners, this one's a good one. This one is on writing, so that one's great. If you want some on math or stat, improving comprehension, that is a good practice guide. But ultimately, the one that we are looking for is this one, Assisting Students Struggling with Reading Response to Intervention, Multi-Tiered Intervention in the Primary Grades. So you're going to click on that. And then you can just pull up the whole thing. You can save it as a PDF to your computer, like download it, or you could print it. It's like probably 100 pages, so you may not want to do that. Or you can just read it electronically. But this is the same thing that I was referencing. Remember how I said if you turn to page 9, that will be on there. I'm already past page 9. It might be. Let's see. Okay, yeah, this is page 9. So I like this, so it gives you an overview, an in-depth overview of each of the recommendations. So there's that. I'm actually going to put this link on that slide so that you'll be able to pull that up when I share the PowerPoint with you. I'm gonna go back. Oh, I already have it on there. Look at, I am so smart. Okay, let's go back to here. All right, so now you know how to get to the practice guides. So what I had my group do when I presented on this last week was to, as you're reading through these, there's actually 5 of these recommendations, to kind of self-reflect which part of each recommendation do you feel like you or your school might be strong in, and then which areas do you feel like you need to improve in. So that's something that you could do. So the next part is just really talking about systems. So obviously, if you were just a classroom teacher, you may not have, a ton of say, or you can't change a bunch of systems with just yourself. So everything really has to do with systems. This document, the essential school-wide and center-wide practices in literacy, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about this, but this is the 10 essential school-wide practices, which are really about systems that are adopted in your district and in your school that kind of help things run effectively and efficiently. And many of the things that we talked about with assessment systems and intervention support and you know, high quality literacy resources, those are all in there too. So you need to make sure that these things are in place before you can kind of like move forward. So the next part is really just explaining screener versus diagnostic as far as like assessment data. And so this slide is from, I don't if Nell or Tanya Wright. I think it's from Tanya Wright, I believe. Yes, because it's from Michigan State University. So Tanya Wright, literacy guru and researcher. And she's also a professor at Michigan State University, but she presented this and she really compares a screener and a diagnostic to kind of like a vision screening versus a complete eye exam. So she talks about how a vision screening really is something that you might just do quickly at the pediatrician's office, and they might identify kids who may need glasses, and they typically just refer kids to, you know, go to an optometrist to get a complete eye exam to see if they definitely need glasses, and then also to help them identify specific prescriptions for the glasses that they need. Just give me a second. I'm actually going to plug my laptop in because I forgot to do that earlier. So go ahead and read about the screener and the diagnostic assessment while I'm plugging my laptop in so that it doesn't die on us. Okay, so we just talked about a kind of a screener and a diagnostic, referring it to like an eye exam, but now we're going to talk about as an assessment system. So a screener, the purpose for a screener assessment is to identify children who may not be meeting grade level reading benchmarks. And then the diagnostic assessment actually provides detailed information useful in planning instruction, and then also it provides more information on students accompanied with other formative assessments that that teachers do to see if they actually you know, are at risk for a reading deficiency. That's why we don't want to put all of our eggs in the screener basket, because sometimes students might be flagged in a screener assessment, and it might show that they are below benchmark, but then when you give your diagnostic assessment, such as like DRA or, you know, Fontes and Pinnell, and you give your other assessments, such as the spelling inventory and, you know, writing assessments, all of those might be at or above grade level. It's just the screener can sometimes falsely flag students. So the purpose of a diagnostic assessment is ultimately to inform instruction. This would be just like your DRA assessment and some other ones, but typically DRA is pretty widely used. Your diagnostic assessment shows what the child knows, and then also what the child does not know yet. It also should inform teachers on what they need to teach. They should be used regularly to determine if instruction is effective or not. So Tanya Wright, when she was talking about assessments, she always talks about the first question that classroom teachers need to ask about each child is, can they comprehend grade level text? So sometimes people are like, well, what about reading grade level text? But I'm going to show you kind of the cognitive model of reading in a minute, but I'm going to show you kind of how that model works and why she goes with comprehension first. So can they understand grade level text? So potential data sources would be maybe observations in your class during like reading or your discussion of grade level text. You could do a running record with grade level text, but you would also have to do like a retell afterwards or some comprehension questions, or maybe it's just an assessment that your district is already using that has that comprehension component. So many of us are using, you know, the DRA or the FNP, things like that. So we already have some of these assessments that have comprehension with it. Now, a long time ago, some districts were using assessments that didn't have a comprehension component. So if you were doing, you know, Ames Web or Dibbles or whatnot, and you were just doing the oral reading fluency and you were having them just read the text and not measuring their comprehension, some kids kind of slid through the cracks because they were a really fast reader. And so we didn't know if they could necessarily understand and comprehend the text or not. Now, on the opposite end, there were some students that kind of were flagged or kind of failed those fluency assessments because they were slow and careful readers. It's just we didn't have that comprehension component to go with it to show, yeah, they're slow and careful, but they actually have some really high level comprehension going. So that's why it's important that we're using these high quality assessments that have that comprehension subtest to go with it as well. So if you test a child and it shows that they can read and comprehend grade level text, yes, that is great. It's exactly what we want. But many of kids can't. So we want to find out why not if a child can't. Tanya Wright says, what does the child need to learn in order to make progress? Well, we may not know. So we need more assessments to determine that. Okay, so we need to find out why the child is below grade level for reading comprehension. Lots of different possibilities. It could be the child cannot read the words automatically and it's too focused on decoding words rather than actually remembering what they read or understanding what they read. It could be another possibility. The child does not have strong oral language and has difficulty understanding the text or content, even in an oral language context. Another possibility would be the child doesn't have the necessary strategic knowledge just to support the text comprehension. And oftentimes there could be multiple challenges or other challenges like engagement or motivation or things like that. We got to find out the reason why the child cannot comprehend. So this is kind of that mapping kind of. So we were talking about reading comprehension being right here. And if a kid cannot comprehend grade level text, which pathway? We need to find out which pathway they're going to go. Is it because they cannot, they don't have that automatic word recognition? Okay. And then if they don't have that automatic word recognition, is it because of their fluency? And then if they are not fluently reading the text, is it because they still don't have those decoding strategies, or they don't have the sight word recognition, or they don't have that letter sound phonics knowledge, or just letters and sound knowledge? Or it could lead all the way back to phonological awareness or print concepts. Now, there's other pathways too. Maybe they don't have that oral language comprehension, and it could lead to a variety of things right here, like they need vocabulary, background knowledge. This is typically where many EL students fall in. Or they don't have that strategic knowledge of like reading strategies, or they don't have, they don't know specific purposes for reading. But oftentimes it's really about this pathway right here. And some things that I want to clear up are, I see many teachers jumping right into fluency. They say that they are not a grade level reader because they need fluency. And that might be the case, but too many kids are being put into a fluency intervention that actually still need things like decoding strategies. They still need phonics work. So this actually resonated with me because I told a story during our intervention PD last week about my niece. She is in second grade, and my sister is not in the field of education at all, and my niece is a struggling reader. And she asked me to go to her fall conference with her teacher with her. So it was me and my sister, and my niece was there, but she didn't sit with us. She was over doing something else. Little did the teacher know that I already knew that my niece was a struggling reader. In just about 2 weeks before that, I decided that I wanted to know kind of what her reading level was, and I wanted to know her strengths and the things that she needed to work on. So I, of course, brought home a DRA kit from work and tested her. And I first tested her on, I think her last year's teacher had said she was a 12 or 14. And so I started there, and she made 40 some odd errors on it. And so we ended up dropping all the way down into a 6. She was an independent 6. She was an instructional 8. And it was definitely decoding strategies. So lots of word accuracy errors. And so I had all of that knowledge going into her parent teacher conference with my sister. And right away, her teacher had said, don't worry, she's been, DRA tested, and she's going to be getting an intervention. We're working on fluency. Well, that kind of triggered me because, it's not fluency that she needs. It's not just because she's reading slow and she's not phrasing words or pausing for punctuation. It's because she does not know how to, do decoding strategies, use her visual cues to kind of debug those tricky words. So that kind of made me a little bit upset. But she's making progress and things like that. But that was one connection that I had made to kind of this assessment model. So please do not jump to conclusions and go to a fluency intervention. We need to make sure that's what the student actually needs. It could be decoding. You just need to give more assessments to find out. I have another kind of connection to this cognitive model of reading. I was working with, a fourth grade classroom teacher and also special education teacher together, kind of as a team. They share some students in fourth grade that are in the gen ed room for fourth grade, and then also they go see the resource room teacher, and they are making slow progress. They are about DRA level 6 independently. They were 4s, a few months ago, just making minimal progress. And we have been doing some, decoding and phonics interventions with them. They made a little bit of progress. And we decided that something was missing. We felt like there were some gaps in some of their literacy instruction. So we decided to pull out it's an Orton-Gillingham phonological awareness assessment. There's lots of different types of phonological awareness assessments out there. MLPP has like a free one. There's tons. But anyway, we decided to give them the whole entire assessment, and it kind of tested them on, syllables, rhyming words, identifying the beginning sound, ending sounds, middle sounds, segmenting, blending. And right away, we found out that at least one student had no rhyming skills at all. So that was a huge gap. And then there was another student that never could isolate an ending sound in words. So we feel like those would kind of be quick fixes. You could go right back to a phonological awareness, intervention with them and kind of like fill in those gaps for them. So that possibly could be hindering their progress from moving forward, but just very interesting. So there's a lot. We're going to skip this. Okay. So how do we identify kids that need tier 2 instruction? Of course, it's screeners. The purpose of a screener assessment, something like NWEA or whatever you guys use, is to identify kids who may be struggling. So sometimes those students that you definitely, that are kind of flagged based on your screener, definitely need the tier 2 instruction, but then you need to be careful that you don't just automatically kind of like use that data and put them in intervention. You need to look at all the assessments and all the information that you know about the child before you kind of move forward. provides information about how kids compare to others at their grade level, typically norm reference. So that says if you're using a screener, you need to look at, the percentiles. You need to look at their norm scores, like their grade level, RIT scores, things like that. Because it's like I know NWA, it's a national assessment, so it has that typical, that grade level norm reference score, so you can kind of tell parents this is where they should be, and they're in the 10th percentile, in the nation compared to other peers in the same grade. With screeners, you don't use them all the time. They're infrequently used. It's usually about 3 times a year, 2 or 3 times a year. Most people are doing 3 times a year, but you don't want to over test students because it's just a screener. So screeners and diagnostics really should work together. You should give the screener, and then this is referencing it compared to kind of like giving glasses. Then it will identify students who may need glasses, and then of those students, you need to take them to an eye doctor where they're going to give a diagnostic assessment or like their full eye exam. And then after that, if they need glasses, they will for sure tell them, and then the glasses will be given that specific prescription to meet the individual needs of that child. Okay, this is how screeners should not work. First, you do the vision screening, and then you identify students who may need glasses, and then you just give the same glasses with the same prescription to all the students that were flagged that might need glasses. So there's a big problem. Many people are doing the one-size-fits-all interventions with students, so we need to stop doing that. We are not giving every person that needs glasses the same prescription because that does not work. So we should not be giving all the kids that need an intervention the same reading intervention. We also don't want to use screeners alone to make decisions about daily instruction. So children have different needs as readers. We need to make sure that we are meeting their needs. That's why we have further assessments like diagnostics, formatives. We need to have a menu of interventions for our students. So this is how our assessment should work together for literacy. We have our screener assessment. We identify students who might be struggling. We give them the diagnostic assessment, and then we target instruction to meet those students' specific needs. Maybe they need to learn to monitor for comprehension. Maybe they still need rhyming. Maybe they need to read with expression. Maybe they just need to learn what a word is. Maybe they need to know all of their letters and sounds still. So all of this kind of correlates to the read by grade 3 law, without, pulling out the actual law. These are just some of the highlights. So starting in 2017-18, these are some of the things that were brought up in the read by grade 3 law. So it wants districts to select a valid screening, formative, and diagnostic reading assessment system. Okay, that just means making sure you're having high quality assessments. And so many districts are using your screener might be NWA, you're using your DRA2, and then in addition to that, you might be doing, running records for your formative assessment, or you might be doing some spelling inventories, you might be giving MLPP assessments, all of those different things. The third grade law just says that, all of these things must be used in grades K3 minimum. All these things that are good in K3 are also good 4, 5, on up. But the law states that K3 must be using these things. Talks about students have to be assessed 3 times a year. First assessment must be given within the first 30 days of school. Then it goes into talking about how any student who exhibits a reading deficiency, the district has to provide that IRIP within the first 30 days of identification. It talks about how the intervention has to be described. Then we have to go on and provide them. We have to provide notice to parents about their intervention. We need to assist the parents on helping their kids at home and things like that. It also talks about utilizing literacy coaches. If your district doesn't have their own literacy coaches, and the ISD coach has to be utilized as well, just to develop specific professional learning for teachers and things like that. Talks about tier 1 instruction and how it needs to be evidence-based for your core reading instruction. Then it goes on to list what interventions have to entail. It talks about they have to be student-specific. That means we're not giving the same intervention to every single student. Talks about we need to screen and progress monitor at least 3 times a year. Include intensive development in the 5 big ideas of literacy. That means we're not going to hit every single one of them, but it's talking about, you need to hit at least one of them based on the student's needs. The law talks about the interventions have to be systematic, explicit, multisensory, and sequential. Has to be implemented during regular school hours, and it has to be in addition to regular reading instruction. Double dip, that means they cannot leave during your tier 1 instruction. When you're doing readers workshop, when you're doing your mini lesson, they cannot be leaving and getting their intervention during that time. They can't miss regular instruction to be getting an intervention. Then it talks about providing parents with that read at home plan, including participation and training workshops, and then that read at home plan and how to read with their kids at home and help them in their deficiency and things like that. So what should be happening during intervention? This is probably what you've all been waiting for. So since students can't miss core instruction, tier 1 instruction, a lot of districts are implementing an intervention block, or they might be interventing a win time. Win time stands for what I need. What I need time. It's kind of like a separate sacred time of the day. It could be approximately 30 to 45 minutes, separate block of time built into everyone's schedules. So that should be at least K3, and definitely could be utilized for all grades. But grade levels or teacher teams could group students by needs during that time. If you have grade level partners ahead of time, you could look at data, swap students by needs, and decide who is going to do what as far as interventions during that time. Oftentimes, buildings or districts will allocate extra support for teachers or during their intervention block during that time. That might mean it's kind of a stop and drop, all hands on deck. If there's any, parapros during that time, they might be allocated to that intervention block. It could be maybe special ed teachers are allocated. If you have interventionists, they might be allocated, things like that. The teacher usually assumes the role of one of the interventionists during that time. So that means you stop your regular instruction and you now are providing interventions to those students as well. So on or above level students could be getting instruction at their level. They could be participating in enrichment activities, or they could be working in groups or independently on a purposeful task. So that just means your main focus during intervention time or win time is not going to be with your on or above level students. If you have enough support allocated, you could kind of put together some instruction for them. But if not, then you just need to come up with something purposeful that's going to kind of meet their needs, whether they are doing something independently or working in groups. So then students that are below tier 2 and tier 3 students will all be receiving intervention instruction during that time. So they might be getting intervention from you. Maybe they are going to be getting intervention from your grade level partner or an interventionist or things like that. So here are some practical ideas for management during that time, your win time or your intervention block. So oftentimes too many kids need intervention and there's not enough instructional staff to allocate. So some things that you can do is maybe consider taking 2 15-minute or 20-minute groups during that time. So you might swap halfway in between. That way you would, one person could actually see, 2 groups of students during that time. What kinds of purposeful activities can I have my on or above level students do without teacher support? It could be things like ReadWorks, RAS Kids, independent or partner reading, book clubs, literacy workstations. You might be having them, if they're independently reading or partner reading, maybe they're responding in the reader's notebook, things like that. If students are switching classes or locations during intervention, my suggestion is to consider like posting a location chart and kind of set procedures for easy transition. So you might have the students, if they're going somewhere else, always kind of like line up by the door or go stand in the hallway by, this specific poster until that interventionist picks them up or whatever. You just have to really work on those routines and procedures. Otherwise, they're going to cut into your instruction time for interventions, and we don't want that to happen. So one thing I want to clarify is intervention does not have to mean sending students out. So remember how we talked about teachers are going to assume the role of an interventionist during that time? That kind of means stop and drop everything. You are now an interventionist, okay? You're going to drop everything. You're not moving on with your instruction. You are going to be giving intensive or strategic instruction to tier 2 or tier 3 students during that time. Research shows, and I think that it was in one of the What Works Clearinghouse practice guides. I know for sure it's in the literacy, the school-wide practice document for systems. It talks about how during intervention time, the most qualified staff needs to be seeing the lowest students. Oftentimes we might see, paraprofessionals that haven't been to intensive training, and they might be, you might just be sending out your most neediest students to them. Those are your tier 3 students, but they haven't been the ones to get that, reading professional learning like, like most teachers have. So we just need to make sure that our most qualified staff is the one that is seeing our lowest students. Sometimes I've seen people flip-flop if they're able to. So if a para comes in, they might be able to support those on or above level students, and while the teacher is seeing like a tier 2 or tier 3 group. If you absolutely cannot get away from paraprofessionals seeing students that are paraprofessionals that are untrained, as I want to say, from seeing intervention students, oftentimes districts will give them the tier 2 students, and then maybe the classroom teachers or a highly qualified coach or interventionist would see the tier 3 students. So it's just really up to your district's policy. So here is a good example of what it might look like if you're going to share students between a grade level. So this is an example of 3 second grade teachers at the beginning of the year, kind of looking at all their data and putting forth and kind of putting their kids into groups based on needs. So you'll see groups that are highlighted in red are going to be like tier 3 students that are more than like 1 level below. And for second grade, they should be at about a 16 or an 18 the beginning of the year. And then anything in yellow would be kids that are just strategic. They will be just like 1 level below. So those would be like your tier 2 students. So as you can see, it looks like right here. So this would be, they grouped the lowest students together. So we have 3 classrooms. I label them A, B, and C. And there's 4 students all together that kind of need the same thing. You never want to just group them by reading level. You always want to group them by needs. So here's their focus for this group would be more like they need decoding and they need basic reading strategies. So all of those 4 kids are going to be seen by a Title I teacher. She's also reading recovery, but she just does reading recovery for first grade. So that would be highly qualified. I do like to kind of put their DRA level on there just so that you kind of know when you're choosing books or you just want to monitor their progress. So these 4 kids are in between a 6 and an 8, and they're the most neediest kids out of second grade. And then now these kids are 6 kids Their focus is still decoding, and they also need kind of like what makes sense. They are going to see teacher B, so they're going to be seeing a second grade teacher during that time. They are 10s and 12s. And then the next group, they're also 10s and 12s, but they seem to be higher functioning than the other group. They still have that focus of decoding, maybe a tad bit different skills. They're going to be seen by teacher A, which is another second grade teacher. She has 5 kids that kind of need all the same. Now we're getting into the yellow or your tier 2 kids. Their focus is decoding. They also need retelling. These are 12s and 14s. They are going to see a Title I para. There's 4 kids that all need the same thing. And then the next group of kids, they're also going to see another Title I para. There's 6 of them. Their focus is fluency. They're just slightly below. They're at a dairy 14, and there's 6 kids that need to see them. So now you're probably wondering, what about the rest of the kids? So there are 22 kids in this group that are meeting the expectation, that kind of need 16s and 18s. And they all kind of need the same thing. They all need to be working on that author's message or that comprehension component. So in this example, do you remember how we said there were 3 second grade classroom teachers? Now in the previous slide, you only see that classroom teacher B and classroom teacher A, they're taking a group. They decided to give 22 kids to classroom teacher C so that she could kind of do a win time, what I need, and kind of work on comprehension and author's message with all of these students. So all these students at that time would move to classroom teacher C, and they would work on things that they need. And then you're probably wondering, wow, they don't really have a lot of kids. Well, they do. There's 18 kids left over between the 3 classes. Those are your blue kids. Those are the kids that are exceeding the expectation. They might be reading at like a level 20 or above. And in this case, it talks about how those students are kept within each homeroom classroom, and they are either in their own classroom library or sitting at their seats, kind of working independently. They have independent reading tasks, and they have purposeful readers responses that they need to be logging into their notebooks during that time. So they're kind of working independently. So they will not have a teacher to kind of support them during that time. So that's how that grade level made it work. It's kind of about trial and error. The next thing that we're going to talk about, which is super important, is how schools should have a menu of interventions. So we're going to talk about programs. It talks about, if you have programs, you need to make sure that they meet the needs of the students that you're using them with. And then you also need to check out the evidence. Does it work? Is it effective or not? So there's 2 websites on here. I don't always use the edreports.com, but you can go to edreports.com and it will talk about the standards that it hits and if it's effective and things like that. But the most probably most used website to check out the evidence and the effectiveness is that What Works Clearinghouse website. So it's the same website that we went to before when we were looking at that practice guide, but you can actually check out if you can check out the effectiveness of different programs and interventions. So we're going to head there again. I'm going to drop my menu down to this website. I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning so I can show you how to get there. Okay, so remember we went to Google, we typed in What Works Clearinghouse, and then this pops up. Last time we scrolled all the way to the bottom. We're not going to do that this time. What you can do it a few different ways. First, you can go in here, and if you already know the name of a program, you could just type it in just to see if it popped up. What I like to do is just go to literacy. And then you can kind of look all the way down. So for instance, let's say we want to check out reading recovery, and it's right on here. And not every single program is on here, but I would say before you're going to use a program or buy a program, it's important for you to check it out and see what the evidence shows. So we're going to check out reading recovery on here, and it'll give you like just an overview of the effectiveness right here. So it shows if a kid needs alphabetics, it shows that it really gives positive effects for alphabetics. If they need comprehension, it gives potentially positive effects for comprehension. Reading achievement, it has positive effects. And then reading fluency, it has potential positive effects. If you want to see the whole thing, what you can do is click on intervention report. And then you could read the whole study and all the studies that were given on the intervention. But what I like to do is just go to the summary of the findings. And so this is just for reading recovery. It talks about alphabetics. If a student needs alphabetics based on this report, if they got reading recovery, the average student increased 21 percentile points. Okay, so that means if a student started off in the 20th percentile for alphabetics, they have the potential to moving all the way up to the 41st. Now for reading fluency, the average is gaining 46 percentile points in improvement. Comprehension, 14 percentile points, and then just general reading achievement, 27 percentile points. So that's awesome. So now let's go back to, let's look at another one. You want to make sure that it's effective. You want to make sure it meets the needs of your students. So let's go to LLI, Level Literacy Intervention, and check that out. A lot of districts have that. So this is an overview. And so right away, if you have a student that needs alphabetics and you just looked at this snapshot, are you going to use LLI as an intervention for them? I'm hoping you say no. Let's look into the intervention report. And we're going to look it up. So general reading achievement, an average of 11 percentile points increase. That's okay. Same thing for reading fluency. 11 percentile points increase. In alphabetics, it's just 5 percentile. So that's not really a huge improvement. So we just want to make sure that we use an intervention that's effective, and then we use one that meets the needs of our kids. You already checked that out. All right, so one thing that I want to talk about is read naturally. A lot of districts are familiar with this intervention. So if you pull up Read Naturally, whoops, it talks about general reading achievement, an average of 10 percentile points. Reading fluency, 7 percentile points, not super high. Alphabetics, 2 percentile points. It says no discernible effects, so you probably don't want to use it if kids need alphabetics. Comprehension, 0. So if you have a kid that needs comprehension, I want you to think about that before you use Read Naturally. Okay, so we're right on track. Next session, we're gonna dig deep into, I'm gonna talk more about specific interventions, but before I end today, I want to tell you about an awesome book. There's actually 2 awesome books, but I'm more familiar with the K-3 one. It's How to Plan Differentiated Reading Instruction. It's Resources for Grades K-3. I'm telling you, don't be concerned just because it says K-3 and if you teach a higher grade, because in this book I know some 4th and 5th grade teachers that are pulling some of these instructional interventions out of here and doing them with their students because they need them and it's meeting their needs. But this book right here is absolutely amazing. It has systematic instructional resources that you can do tier 2 and tier 3 interventions with students in there in a variety of areas. It has interventions for if students need letters and sounds. It has an intervention if students know letters and sounds, but they don't know what to do with them. So if they still need that phonological awareness, they still need basic phonics skills. If kids need, phonics, the CVC, if they need digraphs and blends, if they need intervention for reading multisyllabic words. Towards the back of the book, it gets into fluency and comprehension. I have not explored that yet, but I'm super excited to explore it. We're going to talk about that next time. And then I'm going to show you some other interventions that are out there. Which will be, some of them you might already know, some of them might be new to you, but we're gonna talk about those. But if you feel like you might want to purchase a book on Amazon, I'm highly recommending you to kind of explore this one, or maybe if you and a colleague want to kind of go in on a book and kind of share it. This is something that we're going to talk about next time. You don't necessarily need this book for next time, but I feel like it's going to be a really awesome resource and you're really going to like it. Okay, so these are going to be our focus questions for next time, and that tells me that our time is up, and I really thank you for bearing with me on my first kind of like webinar overview of PD, and also thank you for not making fun of me at the beginning of this video when you actually got to see my self-quarantined face, because I have been in the house for 7 days straight with my 3 children, and as you can see, I have 0 makeup on. But I just wanted to do something productive today. And I wanted to show you kind of me in my real experience, at my house, working on schoolwork and things like that. So, all right, thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any questions. You can email me, kwhite@lapierreisd.org. And hang in there, guys.